The cornfields of western Iowa have a way of playing tricks on your mind after dark. In the daytime, they're just fields, endless rows of green in summer, golden brown in fall. But at night, especially along the Nebraska border where the hills start to roll and the forests creep in between the farmland, those fields become something else entirely. The corn whispers secrets to itself in the wind, and the shadows between the rows seem to move with purpose. I'm Blake Weber, and I've lived in Harrison County my entire life. 23 years of watching the seasons change, watching farms get passed down or sold off, watching the small towns either adapt or slowly die. I thought I knew every strange thing these borderlands could throw at me. I was wrong. It started in August 2021, during one of those sticky Midwestern nights where the air feels like warm syrup and thunder grumbles in the distance without ever delivering rain. My best friend Derek Mitchell had called around 1:30 a.m., asking for a ride home from a party out at the old Peterson place. I didn't mind. I was still up working on my truck, a '98 Ford F-150 that I'd just finished repainting. The front bumper had taken me 3 weekends to get right, and I was pretty proud of how it turned out. The Peterson farm sat about 15 miles outside of town, tucked into one of those pockets where the GPS gets confused and cell service becomes theoretical. Getting there meant navigating a maze of gravel roads with names like 260th Street and Maple Road, though I'd never seen a maple tree anywhere near them. The roads out there follow property lines laid down in the 1800s, creating a grid that looks neat on maps but feels like a labyrinth when you're actually driving it. Derek was waiting at the end of the Petersons' long gravel driveway when I pulled up. The party was still going strong. I could hear music thumping from the barn they'd converted into a sort of rural dance club, and shapes moved in front of the outdoor lights like moths around a flame. Derek climbed into the passenger seat, bringing with him the smell of cheap beer and bonfire smoke. "Thanks for coming, man," he said, slumping against the window. I was not about to sleep in my car again. I noticed he was more coherent than I'd expected, given the hour and the occasion. Derek wasn't a heavy drinker. He'd learned that lesson sophomore year of high school when his dad caught him raiding the liquor cabinet. Tonight, he'd mostly gone to the party because Miranda Chen was there, though from his expression, I gathered that particular mission hadn't been successful. We took the back roads home, partly because it was shorter, partly because the county deputies like to set up checkpoints on the main highway on party nights. The full moon hung low and heavy in the sky, casting everything in a silvery light that made the world look slightly unreal. The gravel crunched under my tires as we wound our way through the maze of field roads, talking about nothing in particular. That's when we saw the raccoon. It was a big one, probably 15 or 20 pounds, waddling across the road with that peculiar rolling gait they have. I slowed down, mindful of my newly painted bumper. Derek was in the middle of telling me about something Miranda had said when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. "What the hell is that?" At first I thought he was talking about the raccoon. Then I saw it. Something moving in the darkness behind the animal, something that made my brain try to reject what my eyes were seeing. It came from the left side of the road, emerging from the cornfield like a shadow detaching itself from the greater darkness. The creature and I struggle even now to call it that, because the word seems inadequate, was impossibly tall. 7, maybe 8 feet of gray flesh stretched over a frame that looked both emaciated and powerful. Its arms hung almost to the ground, ending in hands that seemed too large for even its massive frame. But it was the way it moved that truly horrified me. Despite its size, it crossed the road in 3 fluid strides that seemed to defy physics. Its joints bent in ways that suggested either incredible flexibility or an anatomy completely alien to anything I'd ever seen. The moonlight revealed patches where fur or skin was missing, exposing something underneath that gleamed wetly. Derek's scream snapped me out of my paralysis. He was pressing himself back against the seat, his eyes wide with terror. That reaction, more than anything else, convinced me that what I was seeing was real. You can doubt your own senses, convince yourself you're tired or imagining things, but when someone else sees the same impossible thing you're seeing, that's when true fear sets in. I slammed my foot down on the accelerator, and the truck's engine roared in response. The back end fishtailed on the loose gravel as we took off, throwing rocks against the undercarriage with a sound like hail. The speedometer crept past 60, then 80, then 100, but it didn't feel fast enough. Every shadow we passed could have been that thing. Every dark spot between the trees could have held more of them. We made it to Derek's family farm in record time, the truck's suspension protesting every curve and bump. His place was a century farm, one of those properties that had been in the same family for over 100 years. The main house was a massive 3-story Victorian that his great-grandfather had built, complete with a widow's walk that nobody ever used. Behind it stood the barn, a looming red structure that housed their remaining livestock, a few dairy cows and some goats his mom kept for making cheese. I barely had time to throw the truck into park before Derek was out the door, running for the house. The porch light cast a weak yellow glow that seemed to emphasize the darkness beyond rather than push it back. I was right behind him, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. That's when we heard it. The sound started low, almost subsonic, before rising to a pitch that made my teeth ache. It was like someone had taken the scream of a mountain lion and layered it over a woman's cry of terror, then played it through a broken speaker. The sound echoed off the barn and seemed to hang in the air far longer than it should have. Derek fumbled with his keys, cursing under his breath. Over his shoulder I saw movement near the barn, a tall human-like figure standing on the elevated terrace that ran along the building's west side. The moonlight caught it just right, and for a moment I could see those patches of missing skin again. Could see the way its head moved in short, jerky motions, like a bird studying its prey. "Inside, now!" I shoved Derek through the door as soon as he got it open. We slammed it shut behind us, and Derek immediately started throwing the deadbolts, all 3 of them, installed by his paranoid uncle after a series of break-ins in the county last year. The house was dark except for a small nightlight in the kitchen. Derek's parents were away at a livestock auction in Omaha, leaving him to watch the place. Some guardian he'd turned out to be. We were both shaking so bad we could barely stand. "The gun safe," Derek said suddenly. "Dad's guns are in the study." We made our way through the dark house, trying to avoid looking out any windows. The study was a small room off the main hallway, lined with agricultural magazines and old family photos. The gun safe stood in one corner, a heavy steel cabinet that had been a fixture in the house as long as I'd known the Mitchells. Derek knew the combination by heart. His dad had made him memorize it when he turned 12. Inside were several hunting rifles, a few shotguns, and Mr. Mitchell's prized AR-15. I grabbed the AR while Derek took his dad's .45 pistol. We checked that they were loaded, then took up positions in the living room, away from the windows, but where we could see both the front and back doors. "What the hell was that thing?" Derek's voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know." I was trying to keep my voice steady, but the image of that creature's fluid movement kept playing in my mind. But it's not like anything I've ever seen before. We stayed up all night, jumping at every creak of the old house settling, every rustle of wind through the cornfields outside. Several times we heard that terrible scream again, each time seeming to come from a different direction. Around 4 a.m., something started walking on the roof. Heavy footsteps that moved from one end of the house to the other, punctuated by what sounded like claws scraping against the shingles. Dawn finally came, turning the sky from black to gray to pale blue. The morning light revealed nothing unusual around the house. No footprints, no signs of the terror we'd experienced. If it hadn't been for the guns still clutched in our trembling hands, We might have convinced ourselves it was all a shared hallucination. The next night, Derek's mom called with news that made our blood run cold. She was hysterical, barely able to get the words out between sobs. The livestock, their prize dairy cow and one of the goats, had been found dead in the pasture, their bodies torn apart with a violence that defied explanation. Derek put the phone on speaker so I could hear his mom's description. The animals hadn't been eaten, just destroyed. Whatever had killed them had displayed a kind of methodical savagery that went beyond normal predator behavior. The local veterinarian, Dr. Hansen, had been called out to examine the remains. He'd been studying animal attacks in the area for 30 years and had never seen anything like it. The wounds, he'd told Derek's mom, they're not consistent with any known predator. Mountain lions kill clean, and wolves aren't established in this area. This was something else. That was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, we started noticing other strange things happening around the Mitchell farm. The incidents always seemed to cluster around the full moon, as if whatever was out there grew bolder when the night was brightest. About 3 weeks after the first encounter, we had a group over at Derek's place. His parents were still uneasy about the livestock incidents, but had reluctantly agreed to let him have some friends stay the night. There were 6 of us total: Derek and me, our friends Greg Anderson and Jay Martinez, and their girlfriends Katie and Sophia. We were all upstairs in Derek's room, which took up most of the second floor's west wing. The room was huge, typical of these old farmhouses, with tall windows that looked out over the property. We were watching horror movies on his laptop, ironically enough, when the tapping started. Tap, tap, tap. At first we thought it was part of the movie. Then it came again. 3 distinct taps against the window glass. The sound had a deliberate quality to it, like someone trying to get our attention. But this was the second floor, a good 15 feet off the ground, with no trees anywhere near the house. Tap, tap, tap. Katie was the first to notice that the sound wasn't coming from the window we were facing, but from one behind us. We all turned slowly, the laptop screen casting just enough light to see the window in question. For a moment, nothing moved. Then we saw it. A long gray finger tapping against the glass. The nail at its tip looked more like a claw, scratching tiny patterns into the window's surface with each tap. Sophia screamed, and the finger withdrew instantly. Jay jumped up and turned on the overhead light, and we all crowded around the window, trying to see what had been there. The night outside was clear, the moon nearly full again, providing plenty of light to see that there was absolutely nothing that could have reached the window. No trees, no ladder, nothing. But when we looked closer at the glass, we could see the marks. 3 sets of small scratches arranged in a triangular pattern, too precise to be random, too deliberate to be explained away. A few days later, everything came to a head. Greg, Jay, and I were playing paintball in the wooded area behind Derek's property. It was something we did often. The woods provided natural cover, and we'd set up various obstacles and hiding spots over the years. We knew those woods like the backs of our hands, or at least we thought we did. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows between the trees. I called out that we should wrap it up and head back to start the bonfire we'd planned for later. Jay met up with me near our usual gathering spot, but Greg was nowhere to be seen. We waited a few minutes, thinking he was trying to get in one last ambush. But something felt wrong. The woods had gone quiet, that unnatural silence we'd experienced the night we first saw the creature. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of leaves in the wind. We started backtracking, calling Greg's name. That's when Jay spotted something in a drainage ditch. A huddled figure in Greg's familiar blue hoodie. Greg was curled into a tight ball, shaking violently. His paintball gun lay forgotten beside him, and his face was chalk white. "Greg? Man, what happened?" Jay reached for him, but Greg flinched away. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I heard Blake calling me, saying he found something cool. that I needed to come see. He looked up at me with terrified eyes. It sounded exactly like you, but wrong. Like something was wearing your voice like an ill-fitting suit. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as Greg continued. I followed the voice deeper into the woods. It kept saying, "Come here, I'm over here." But something about it started to feel off. The voice got darker, hollow somehow. Then I saw it, standing between two trees, so tall it had to bend down to fit under the branches. Those arms, those fucking arms. He broke off, shuddering. I ran. I just ran as fast as I could, but I could hear it moving through the trees behind me. Not running, not really. More like gliding. Like it was letting me run. I fell into this ditch and just froze. As if on cue, we heard it. That same ungodly scream that had haunted my dreams since that first night. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, reverberating through the growing darkness. Jay grabbed Greg's arm and hauled him to his feet. We ran back toward the house, not daring to look behind us. That night marked a turning point for all of us. Jay didn't even stay for the bonfire. He got in his truck and left, tires throwing gravel as he sped down the driveway. I couldn't blame him. Greg was still shaking when we got him inside, and it took 3 cups of hot coffee before he could speak normally again. The thing that truly terrified me wasn't just the creature's ability to mimic voices. It was the intelligence behind that mimicry. This wasn't some animal acting on instinct. Whatever this thing was, it was hunting us, playing with us, learning our patterns and habits, using our own voices against us. Derek's parents returned the next day to find their son and his friend, me, sitting in the kitchen with all the lights on, the AR-15 and .45 still within arm's reach. We tried to explain what had happened, but like most adults, they wanted rational explanations. They talked about coyotes, about teenagers playing pranks, about overactive imaginations. But they couldn't explain away everything. The scratches on the second-floor window, the deep, inhuman footprints we found in the freshly tilled field behind the barn, the way their dogs refused to go outside after dark anymore, huddling in the basement and whining at sounds we couldn't hear. That was 6 months ago. I don't go to Derek's place at night anymore. None of us do. Greg transferred to a community college in Des Moines, saying he needed to be closer to his family, but we all knew the real reason. Jay stopped returning our calls after a while. Last I heard, he was seeing a therapist about stress-induced hallucinations. The Mitchell farm has changed. The livestock is gone now. Derek's parents sold the remaining animals after losing 2 more cows and a horse in mysterious circumstances. They installed security cameras and motion sensor lights, but the cameras never seem to work right on full moon nights, and the lights have a habit of shorting out at the worst possible moments. Derek still lives there, but he's different, quieter. He keeps a journal of everything he sees and hears, marking down dates and times with obsessive precision. The walls of his room are covered in research newspaper clippings about similar incidents in the area, printouts of Native American legends about skinwalkers and wendigos, grainy photographs of things that might or might not be what we saw. Sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I find myself going through my own research. I've learned that the Iowa-Nebraska border has a long history of strange occurrences. The Omaha tribe had stories about tall, gray creatures that walked like men but weren't men. Early settlers reported livestock mutilations similar to what we experienced. In 1954, an entire family disappeared from their farm just across the border in Nebraska, leaving behind a journal that described something watching from the corn. But what haunts me most is the possibility that we weren't special, that we weren't chosen or cursed or anything dramatic like that. We just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, catching a glimpse of something that's always been there, hiding in the spaces between farms, in the shadows of the cornfields, in the depths of the border woods. I still drive those back roads sometimes, during the day when the sun is high and the world feels normal. The gravel crunches under my tires, and the corn waves in the wind, and I can almost convince myself that nothing happened. Almost. But then the sun starts to set, and I remember the sound of those footsteps on the roof, the sight of those long gray fingers tapping on the window, the hollow mockery of my own voice calling from the woods. And I drive a little faster, keep my eyes straight ahead, and pray that whatever lives in those borderlands stays there, content to watch and wait and hunt in its own territory. Because deep down, I know the truth. It's still out there. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is full and the wind carries strange sounds across the fields, I think it's getting closer. The September morning air felt unusually thick as I merged onto Lafayette Road, the main thoroughfare cutting through the Chickamauga battlefield. The dashboard clock read 6:42, and the sun hadn't quite breached the horizon, leaving the historical grounds draped in a gray pallor. I'd driven this route to work hundreds of times before, the familiar path taking me past weather-worn monuments and silent cannon that stood sentinel over the grounds where thousands had died during the Civil War. The battlefield had always given me an odd feeling, but I'd grown accustomed to it over the years. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering about the stories these grounds held, the last breaths, final thoughts, and unfulfilled promises of young men who never made it home. But that morning felt different. The air seemed to press against my car windows with an almost tangible weight. I'd taken to listening to true crime podcasts during my morning commute, but that day the voices discussing murder cases felt somehow disrespectful. I switched it off, leaving only the low hum of my Honda Civic's engine and the occasional crunch of tires over patches of gravel that had scattered onto the asphalt. As I approached the tower, a stark stone structure that rose from the battlefield like a broken tooth, the first truly strange thing happened. Through the pre-dawn gloom, my headlights caught something that made me ease off the accelerator. A white-tailed deer standing perfectly still in the center of the road. This wasn't entirely unusual. Deer were common in the area, and I'd had plenty of close calls over the years. But something about this one made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't grazing or looking around nervously like most deer do. Instead, it stood completely motionless, its head turned toward the dense woods that bordered the road. I tapped my horn lightly, expecting the deer to bolt like they always do. Nothing. It remained frozen, as if carved from stone. Frustration began to override my initial unease. I was already cutting it close for my shift at the hospital, and I didn't have time for this. I revved my engine, the sound echoing off the surrounding trees. Still nothing. I revved again, louder this time. The deer's ear twitched, but otherwise it might as well have been stuffed and mounted. On the third rev, something changed in the air, like the pressure dropping before a storm. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I revved the engine a fourth time. What happened next defied everything I knew about animal behavior, and frankly, physics. The deer's front legs left the ground, but not in a leap. Slowly, deliberately, it rose until it was standing on its hind legs like a person. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing, the wrongness of its posture, the impossible angle of its spine. Then it turned its head. Not like a deer checking its surroundings, but a complete 180-degree rotation that no living creature should be capable of. Its eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment, I realized they weren't the soft brown eyes of a deer at all. They were milky white, like cataracts, but with pin-prick black pupils that seemed to bore into my soul. My foot slammed onto the gas pedal before my brain could fully process what I was seeing. The engine roared as I threw the car into reverse, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The rear-view camera showed nothing but empty road behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following. I backed up until I reached a wide spot in the road where I could turn around, my heart thundering against my ribs. As I spun the wheel, My headlights swept across the spot where the deer had been standing. The road was empty now, but something dark glistened on the asphalt. Something that looked unsettlingly like hoof prints, but deeper than any deer should have made. I called out sick from work that day, spending hours researching the history of Chickamauga Battlefield. I'd known the basics, that it was one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War, with over 34,000 casualties. But I found myself diving deeper into personal accounts and local legends. Stories of strange lights, unexplained sounds, and the famous Green Eyes ghost that was said to still patrol the battlefield at night. I told myself I was being ridiculous. There had to be a logical explanation for what I'd seen. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or maybe I'd dozed off for a split second at the wheel. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. And something else nagged at me, a feeling that this wasn't over. It took me 3 days to work up the courage to tell my girlfriend, Maria, about what had happened. She listened with the kind of skeptical patience I'd expected, her dark eyes studying my face as I stumbled through the story. To my surprise, instead of telling me I was crazy, she suggested we go back. "If something weird is really happening out there, don't you want to know what it is?" she asked, her psychology degree showing. "Besides, you have to drive that route to work anyway. Better to face it head on than let it mess with your head." She had a point, but that didn't make it any easier when we pulled onto the battlefield grounds just after sunset 4 days after my initial encounter. The park was technically closed, but the roads remained open, and there was something comforting about having another person in the car, even if that person was currently engaged in a heated phone argument with her mother about Thanksgiving plans. The familiar landmarks looked different in the growing darkness. Shadows seemed to move between the trees, and every monument looked like a crouching figure until we got close enough for the headlights to reveal its true nature. I pulled over near the tower, killing the engine but leaving the headlights on. Maria was still on the phone, her voice rising with frustration as she argued about bringing her new boyfriend to the family gathering. I needed some air and some nicotine to calm my nerves. "I'm going to step out for a smoke," I whispered, holding up my pack of Camels. She nodded absently, deep in her conversation. The moment I closed the car door, I was struck by the absolute silence of the place. No crickets, no distant traffic, not even the rustle of wind through the trees. The only sound was the muffled voice of Maria in the car, and even that seemed somehow wrong, like it was being swallowed by the darkness. I lit my cigarette with trembling hands, the flame of my lighter briefly illuminating the area around me. That's when I heard it, the snap of a twig to my left, followed by another to my right. My heart rate doubled instantly as I remembered stories about predators circling their prey. I squinted into the darkness and my blood ran cold. There, at the edge of the headlight's reach, were eyes, not just one pair but several, glowing with that same milky white sheen I'd seen on the deer. A low growl rolled across the ground, so deep it seemed to vibrate in my chest cavity. I didn't waste time trying to make out what I was looking at. I dropped my cigarette and bolted for the car door, but something was wrong. The distance seemed to stretch, the car getting further away with each step even though I knew that was impossible. Behind me, the growling grew louder, accompanied by the sound of something heavy moving through the underbrush. Then I felt it, warm breath on the back of my neck, carrying the unmistakable smell of decay. My legs went weak, but somehow I kept running. I reached for the door handle just as something brushed against my back, something that felt like fingers, but too long, too cold. I practically dove into the driver's seat, slamming the door behind me. Maria finally ended her call, looking at me with concern. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Before I could answer, something large moved in front of the headlights, just for a second, but long enough to see that it walked on 2 legs, was far too tall to be human, and had the head of a deer with those horrible milky eyes. I gunned the engine and peeled out of there, tires throwing gravel as we fishtailed onto the main road. Maria gripped the dashboard, demanding to know what was wrong, but I couldn't find the words to explain. I didn't slow down until we were miles away from the battlefield, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I finally pulled over at a well-lit gas station, I told her everything. Both encounters, the eyes, the growling, the thing that had almost caught me. To her credit, she didn't dismiss my story outright. Instead, she pulled out her phone and started researching. "There are other reports," she said after a few minutes. "Not exactly like yours, but similar. People seeing animals acting strangely, feeling watched, hearing growls. Some people think the battlefield is Thin Spot, a place where the barrier between our world and whatever's on the other side isn't as strong." I nodded, but I wasn't really listening. I was thinking about all the times I'd driven through the battlefield at night, completely unaware of what was watching from the shadows. I was thinking about the thousands of violent deaths that had occurred there, and whether something about all that pain and suffering had left a mark on the land itself. That was 3 weeks ago. I've since changed my route to work, adding 20 minutes to my commute to avoid the battlefield entirely. I've tried to convince myself that there must be a rational explanation for what happened, but deep down, I know better. Sometimes at night, I still dream about those milky white eyes and wake up with the phantom sensation of breath on the back of my neck. Maria's been doing more research into the history of Chickamauga, and what she's found is disturbing. The land was sacred to the Cherokee long before the Civil War, and they had their own stories about spirits that guarded the area. The battle itself was uncommonly brutal, with men fighting hand to hand in such darkness that they couldn't tell friend from foe. Many bodies were never recovered. I've thought about reporting what happened, but who would believe me? And more importantly, what good would it do? The battlefield has its secrets, and maybe they're better left undisturbed. All I know is that something out there wanted to send me a message that night, a warning that some places belong to the dead, and the living would do well to remember that. These days, when I drive past the battlefield entrance on my new route to work, I don't look toward the tower, but sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I catch glimpses of something standing there, watching. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I can see it rise up on its hind legs. In July 2017, during a summer marked by an uptick in mysterious mountain sickness cases, 7 of us decided to celebrate my 19th birthday by testing our luck against the wilderness. Looking back now, the warning signs were there from the start, though we were too young and too confident to recognize them. Greer, Arizona, with its vast expanses of untamed wilderness, seemed like the perfect backdrop for what we thought would be a typical celebration of youth and freedom. The term off-grid camping doesn't quite capture how far we ventured from civilization. We'd received directions from a stranger who claimed to know the area, the first red flag we cheerfully ignored. There was something unsettling about the way he'd drawn the map, his fingers trembling slightly as he marked the location, his eyes never quite meeting ours. But at 19, other people's fears feel like challenges to be conquered, rather than warnings to be heeded. Our friend's FJ Cruiser carried us as far as it could, the sturdy vehicle straining against increasingly difficult terrain until even its capabilities were exhausted. The hike that followed tested our resolve, each step taking us further from the known world, deeper into territory that felt increasingly unfamiliar. The wilderness around Greer has its own character, different from the sanitized nature you find in state parks. Here, the trees grow closer together, their branches reaching for each other like desperate hands, creating shadows that seem to move independently of the sun's position. We set up camp with the casual efficiency of people who think they understand nature's rules. The site itself was beautiful in that raw, untamed way that makes you feel like you're the first people to ever set foot there. But there were subtle wrongnesses we chose to ignore. The unusual silence in the underbrush, the way certain patches of ground seemed to repel our tent stakes, the occasional whiff of something that smelled like decay mixed with ozone. As darkness approached, we did what young people do when they're far from authorities' watchful eyes. We drank, we smoked, we celebrated our perceived invincibility. The alcohol and cannabis created a comfortable buffer between us and the growing strangeness of our surroundings. When hikers passed by, mistaking us for authorities, there was something off about their hurried pace, the way they kept looking over their shoulders. But we were too wrapped up in our own revelry to notice. The ghost stories around the campfire took on a different quality as the night deepened. Normal tales of urban legends and local haunts gave way to darker narratives. Stories about people who ventured into these woods and came back changed, if they came back at all. The fire cast strange shadows that seemed to dance with malicious intent, and the darkness beyond our circle of light felt alive with possibility. 4 of our friends retired early, leaving 3 to continue the storytelling. My boyfriend and I had gotten particularly crossfaded, that delirious mixture of alcohol and cannabis that makes you feel both invincible and incredibly vulnerable. The tent became our sanctuary, a thin nylon barrier between us and the increasingly oppressive night. After some intimate moments that felt both eternal and fleeting, we drifted into what should have been peaceful sleep. The mountain sickness cases we'd heard about should have given us pause. Local news had been reporting an increase in incidents. Hikers found wandering, babbling about impossible creatures. Experienced outdoorsmen returning from simple day trips with unexplainable gaps in their memories. The authorities blamed it on dehydration, altitude sickness, or hysteria. But there were patterns in the reports that suggested something more sinister, something the official explanations couldn't or wouldn't address. Our campsite, we later learned, was well beyond the areas typically used by hikers or campers. The stranger who gave us directions had marked a location that didn't appear on any official maps. When we tried to find him later, to ask why he'd sent us there, no one in town seemed to know who we were talking about. The local ranger station had no record of anyone matching his description working in or around Greer. The night air carried an unusual quality. Too thick for the altitude, too cold for July in Arizona. It seemed to cling to our skin like something semi-solid, making every movement feel slightly wrong, as if we were moving through invisible cobwebs. The stars above seemed dimmer than they should have been, and the moon, when it finally rose, cast shadows that didn't quite match the objects casting them. The first sign that something was wrong came through the background noise of semi-consciousness. In that hazy state between sleeping and waking, where reality blurs at the edges, I became aware of the sound of our tent's zipper. It moved with deliberate slowness, each tooth separating with a distinct click that seemed to echo in the absolute silence that had fallen over our campsite. The sound should have triggered immediate alarm, but the combination of substances and exhaustion had wrapped my mind in cotton. My boyfriend's touch on my elbow was so light it barely registered, a butterfly's wing against my skin. In my altered state, I assumed he was trying to wake me for some reason, but there was something wrong about the quality of his touch. It wasn't the confident contact of someone trying to rouse another person. It was the desperate reach of someone unable to do more. When the gasping started, it took my brain several seconds to process what I was hearing. The wet, desperate sound of someone fighting for air. When I finally opened my eyes, reality fractured. Hovering over my boyfriend was something that defied description. A figure composed of shadow and malice, its face a nightmare of twisted features that seemed to shift and change, even as I tried to focus on them. The creature's mouth was open in an impossible way, stretching beyond what any human jaw could achieve. But it wasn't what I could see that terrified me most. It was what I could feel, an overwhelming sense of wrongness, as if reality itself was being torn apart by this thing's very existence. The primal part of my brain took over, bypassing all rational thought. I bolted from the tent, barely registering my state of undress, the cold mountain air hitting my skin like a physical blow. The campfire had burned down to embers, casting just enough light to transform the familiar shapes of our campsite into looming threats. I stumbled in the dirt, my feet tangling in unseen obstacles, my mind unable to process anything beyond the need to escape. The appearance of the park ranger should have been reassuring, but something about him triggered deeper instincts of fear. He emerged from the woods like a character in a play, appearing right on cue with a gun drawn. His entrance felt scripted, wrong, as if he'd been waiting in the wings for precisely this moment. The way he moved wasn't quite right, his gestures too precise, too calculated. My friends erupted from their tents like startled animals, creating a chaos of voices and movement that made it impossible to see what was happening at my tent. Their words overlapped and tangled, creating a cacophony that seemed to take physical form in the thick mountain air. But through their voices, I could hear something else, a sound that didn't belong to any human throat. The appearance of the second man marked the moment when our nightmare transcended into something beyond conventional horror. He emerged from the same section of woods as the false ranger, but his movement was different, jerky and unnatural, like a marionette being controlled by an inexperienced puppeteer. Something about his presence felt wrong on a molecular level, as if his very existence was an offense against nature's laws. The shriek he released wasn't just a sound, it was a physical force that seemed to distort the air around us. It matched the creature's own cry in a way that suggested a terrible symmetry, two parts of the same impossible whole. The noise they created together felt like it was trying to tear reality apart at its seams, vibrating at a frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. Through the chaos, I watched in horror as the older man's facade began to crack. His transformation wasn't physical so much as perceptual, as if someone had peeled back a layer of reality to reveal something ancient and malevolent beneath. His eyes changed first, becoming pools of absolute darkness that reflected nothing, not even the dying firelight. They were windows into something that shouldn't exist, something that had been waiting in the spaces between moments for an opportunity to break through. The liquid they produced, I hesitate to call it water because water doesn't move like that, doesn't seem to absorb light rather than reflect it, created an effect I still struggle to describe. When it touched the creature and the false ranger, their forms began to ripple and distort like images in a disturbed pond. The screaming that followed wasn't pain exactly. It was more like the sound of something being forced back through a door it had worked very hard to open. Their violent shaking resembled seizures but felt more like reality itself was trying to reject them, like antibodies attacking an infection. The gurgling sounds they made as they fled into the darkness weren't organic. They were the noise of something impossible being forced to obey possible laws, of entities that had no business in our world being evicted from it. My boyfriend's state when he emerged from the tent was heart-wrenching. The strong, confident young man I knew had been replaced by someone who looked like they'd aged years in minutes. His breathing was labored, each cough seeming to bring up something more than just air, as if the creature had tried to take something essential from him, something more vital than just oxygen. His description of the experience as being similar to a Dementor's kiss from Harry Potter feels almost comically inadequate now, yet somehow perfectly apartment. The comparison to a fictional creature attempting to steal one's soul was the closest reference point any of us had for what we'd witnessed. But while a Dementor is safely contained within the pages of a book, what we encountered that night existed in our world, breathing our air, violating the laws of what we thought was possible. The aftermath of the incident created its own kind of horror. We broke camp in record time, moving with the desperate efficiency of prey animals who've survived a predator's attack. Nobody spoke about what we'd seen. Not then, not during the frantic hike back to the FJ Cruiser, not during the long drive back to civilization. The silence wasn't agreement. It was self-preservation. Speaking about it would make it real, would force us to acknowledge that something had fundamentally changed in our understanding of reality. My boyfriend's recovery was gradual. For weeks afterward, he would wake up gasping, his hand clutching at his throat as if trying to protect something precious from being stolen. His description of the experience became more detailed over time, though never complete. He spoke of feeling something ancient and hungry trying to extract something essential from his body. Not just his breath, but something more fundamental, something that made him human. The park ranger and his companion have become subjects of obsessive research for me since that night. I've searched through records, contacted local authorities, and scoured missing persons reports from the area. Nothing matches what we saw. The few times I've tried to describe them to locals, the conversations end abruptly, with people either changing the subject or suddenly remembering urgent appointments elsewhere. The mountain sickness cases that had been reported that summer suddenly stopped after our encounter. The local papers never connected the dots, but I've kept track of the dates. Whatever was causing people to wander out of those woods with fractured memories and inexplicable terror seemed to vanish around the time of our camping trip. Sometimes I wonder if what we encountered was the source of those cases, or if what appeared to save us was something equally dangerous, just more discriminating in its targets. I still camp occasionally, but never again so far off-grid, never again in places suggested by strangers with trembling hands and averted eyes. The experience left me with a deeper understanding of why our ancestors feared the dark, why they told stories about things that lurked just beyond the firelight. They knew something we've forgotten in our age of electric lights and GPS signals, that there are places where the familiar rules of reality wear thin, where things can slip through from somewhere else. My birthday celebrations since then have been deliberately mundane affairs, held in well-lit places surrounded by the comfortable noise of civilization. But sometimes, especially on clear nights when the moon is high and the shadows are long, I find myself looking toward the mountains around Greer. Not with fear exactly, but with the kind of respect you develop for natural forces that can destroy you, like lightning or avalanches, or things that wear human shapes but aren't human at all. The creature's face, with its impossible angles and shifting features, still appears in my dreams. But what haunts me more is the memory of that dark liquid the younger man poured, the way it seemed to negate the very existence of what it touched. It suggests a hierarchy of horror I'm not equipped to understand, that there are things that prey on us, yes, but also things that prey on them, layers of predation that extend beyond our comprehension. We never reported what happened. How could we? Officer, we were attacked by a soul-sucking entity but were saved by two maybe human beings who disappeared into the woods, isn't the kind of statement that generates helpful responses from authorities. Instead, we carry the experience like a secret badge of survival, a reminder that the world is bigger, stranger, and more dangerous than we're taught to believe. The research I've done since that night has led me down countless rabbit holes of folklore and paranormal investigation. I've found similar accounts scattered throughout history, stories of entities that feed on human essence, of mysterious defenders appearing just in time, of places where reality becomes negotiable. None of them quite match what we experienced, but they all share a common thread: the recognition that our understanding of what's possible is embarrassingly incomplete. Sometimes I think about that stranger who gave us directions, about the slight tremor in his hands, the way he wouldn't meet our eyes. Did he know what he was sending us toward? Was he working under some kind of compulsion, directing young, careless people to something that needed them? Or was he trying to help, knowing that our youthful bravado would make us perfect candidates for witnessing something that needed to be seen? These questions have no answers, and maybe that's the point. Some experiences exist not to be understood, but to remind us that understanding has limits. That night in Greer taught me that the line between known and unknown isn't a boundary. It's a suggestion. one that sometimes gets ignored by things that have their own rules, their own purposes, their own hungry reasons for crossing into our world. My name is Evander Knox, and this happened to me on July 22, 2008. Back then, my biggest concern was deciding which bar to hit on Friday nights, not whatever lay in wait out there in the darkness. I was fresh out of college, working a dead-end data entry job, but with a side hustle that was about to change my life. See, I'd always been into the weird stuff. UFO sightings, ghost stories, you name it. When I discovered there were folks out there actively investigating that stuff, people calling themselves cryptozoologists, well, I'd found my passion. I started with online communities and research, then moved to attending conferences and doing small-time fieldwork on the weekends. It was at one of these conferences that I met Cassandra Reeves. She was brilliant, passionate, and had a way of making even the most outlandish theories sound plausible. We hit it off immediately, spending hours debating the existence of everything from Bigfoot to chupacabras. Cassandra became my partner in crime, so to speak. We'd spend weekends traipsing through forests, setting up motion sensor cameras, and analyzing grainy photos of supposed cryptids. Our dedication must have caught someone's attention, because imagine my surprise when a government recruiter reached out. At first I thought it was a joke, some elaborate prank set up by one of my skeptic friends. But as the recruiter, a stern-faced woman named Victoria Hawthorne, laid out the details, I realized this was very, very real. I was being offered a position in a covert team known only as Unit 47. Our mission? Verify, contain, and if necessary, neutralize anomalous creatures. It was the kind of stuff you joked about around a campfire, not something you actually lived. The training was intense. Months of physical conditioning, weapons training, and crash courses in advanced biology and zoology. They brought in experts from fields I'd never even heard of before. We learned about theoretical physics, quantum mechanics, and how they might apply to creatures that defied our understanding of natural law. My first real mission took us to Wyoming on the trail of what folks reported as a dogman, a freakishly large wolf-like creature that stalked on two legs. Local ranchers had been losing cattle, and fear gripped the region. Our team was tight-knit. Myself, the rookie, Jensen Calloway, our seasoned tracker, and Amelia Davis, ex-military and our weapons expert. Wyoming was like nothing I'd known back east. The isolation hit you, a chilling reminder of how much untamed wilderness was still out there. We spent weeks on recon, setting up cameras and scouring the hills for any sign of our target. Nights were spent under the open sky, scanning the plains with night vision. Nothing broke the monotony but the echoing howl of coyotes in the distance. I began to think it was all a bust, one of those wild goose chases that were part and parcel of our line of work. That all changed on the 14th night. Davis had been tracking something unusual on the thermal, a massive figure moving with uncanny speed through the ravines. "We got something," she said, voice low, "and it's big." In minutes, we were geared up and on the move, adrenaline spiking my veins. We followed the thermal signature, weaving through gullies and patches of scrub. Something about the way it moved felt wrong, unnatural, and then we found the carcass. It was half-eaten, torn open with brutal strength. My stomach lurched. This wasn't coyote work. Whatever we were dealing with was large and merciless. We spread out, flashlights cutting through the gloom. A growl echoed across the ravine, a low guttural sound that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. And there it was, a monstrous silhouette perched on a ridge, illuminated by the moon. It was far bigger than any wolf I had ever seen, closer to the size of a bear, but with an elongated, powerfully built frame. Its head was wolf-like, but with an unnaturally long muzzle and eyes that glinted with a vicious intelligence. We froze in place, the night wind carrying the scent of blood and musk heavy in the air. Davis raised her rifle, but Jensen touched her arm, shaking his head. No telling what kind of firepower that thing could handle. We needed to gather intel, not start a war we couldn't win. We retreated, keeping our eyes locked on the creature until it disappeared back into the darkness. Every rustle of the wind sounded like its returning footsteps, and sleep was impossible. We radioed back to base, our clipped report filled with as much detail as we could muster. The reply came back grim. Containment protocol was now in effect. We weren't just tracking this thing anymore. We were going to bring it down. Over the next few days, we laid a trap. A fresh carcass as bait, a carefully concealed perimeter rigged with tranquilizer darts, and us hunkered down in a blind, ready to finish the job. The whole thing sat wrong with me. We weren't wildlife control. We were executioners. But orders were orders. Night fell again, thick with tension. The creature was out there. We could feel it. Every creak, every snap of a twig had us tensing in anticipation. And then the waiting was over. It materialized out of the darkness, a silent specter drawn to the scent of blood. It approached the carcass cautiously, its enormous form rippling with muscle as it tested the air. Jensen whispered the signal, and the tranquilizer darts launched from their hiding places. 3 darts found their mark, thudding into the creature's thick hide. For a moment, the only sound was the rasp of its breath. Then it roared, a sound of raw fury that shook the very earth beneath our feet. The creature thrashed, snarling, its eyes blazing. The drugs were slowing it down, but not fast enough. It tore at the darts, its claws ripping through its own flesh in frenzied swipes. Then it lunged, not for the carcass, but for us. Chaos erupted. Davis opened fire, rifle reports echoing through the night. The creature staggered under the onslaught, but it kept coming. Jensen grabbed me, dragging me out of the blind a split second before the creature crashed through it, splintering the wood into kindling. I scrambled for cover behind a boulder as Davis continued firing. The night was a blur of adrenaline-fueled terror, flashes of the creature's monstrous form in the moonlight, the acrid smell of gunpowder, and the echoing thunder of gunshots. I fumbled for my own pistol, firing blind bursts at the hulking shadow. Then, a blood-chilling scream cut through the chaos. I saw it in the chaos, the creature ripping into Davis, its jaws closing around her torso, the sickening sound of bones snapping. Jensen was yelling, firing his weapon, trying to draw the creature's attention. I aimed and squeezed the trigger, each shot a prayer. One of my shots must have found its mark. The creature howled again, a pained roar, and whirled away from what was left of Davis. It lunged at Jensen, claws raking across his chest, knocking him to the ground. Blood splattered the rocks. I fired again and again, driven by desperate rage. The creature finally stumbled, its massive form listing awkwardly. It let out a final, shuddering growl and collapsed. Silence descended, punctuated only by Jensen's ragged breaths. I ran to him, heart hammering in my chest. He was still alive, but barely. Blood soaked the front of his shirt, his eyes glazed with pain. Davis was gone, nothing left but a gruesome crimson stain against the rocks. "Get out of here," Jensen gasped, his voice a bloody whisper. "Call for evac." I wanted to argue, to drag him to safety, but there was no time. The drugs wouldn't hold the creature forever. I took one last look at Jensen, memorizing a face that I knew deep down I wouldn't see alive again. Then I turned and ran. I sprinted through the night, guided only by instinct and the distant lights of our base camp. The creature's roars trailed after me, each one a death knell for the man I left behind. By the time I reached the camp, I was a sobbing, incoherent mess. Choked words spilled out. Creature, attack, Davis, Jensen, dead. Evac arrived, a frantic blur of helicopters and medics. They descended on the scene I'd fled, but it was too late. All that remained was a bloodbath and the monstrous still form of the creature. Analysis later revealed the tranquilizers in its blood. We'd gotten it, but at an unimaginable cost. The aftermath was the same institutional coldness we'd all come to expect. Debriefings, classified reports, offers for counseling that no one truly took. They patched me up and sent me back home, a ghost haunted by the vacant stares of fallen friends and the chilling echoes of a creature's roar. I never went back to Unit 47. I couldn't bear the thought of facing more of those things, knowing the price that would inevitably be paid. Some nights I still dream of those Wyoming plains, the vast sky, and the monstrous shadow that devoured the life I once knew. They say the government has it all under control, that they're keeping the world safe from the things lurking in the darkness. If that's true, it comes at a heavy cost. That cost is paid in the blood of people like Jensen and Davis, in the shattered lives of those who make it back. My name is Evander Knox, and I survived. But a part of me died out there on those Wyoming plains, devoured by a creature straight out of nightmares. And that is the true horror story those in charge will never understand. In the months following the Wyoming incident, I spiraled into a dark place. Nightmares plagued my sleep, and during waking hours I jumped at every shadow. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting to strike. The government-mandated therapy sessions did little to ease my mind. How could I explain the horrors I'd witnessed to someone who'd never stared into the eyes of a monster? I tried to move on, to forget. I got a job at a local bookstore, spent my evenings nursing beers at dive bars, anything to feel normal again. But the past has a way of catching up to you, especially when it's marked by blood and terror. It was a rainy Tuesday night when she walked into my life again. Cassandra Reeves, my old cryptozoology partner. She looked different, harder somehow, with a scar running along her jawline that hadn't been there before. Her eyes, though, still held that same fierce curiosity I remembered. "Long time no see, Evander," she said, sliding onto the bar stool next to me. "We need to talk." Over the next few hours, Cassandra unraveled a story that made my blood run cold. She'd been recruited by a rival organization, one that believed Unit 47 was doing more harm than good. According to her sources, the government wasn't just containing these creatures, they were breeding them. "Think about it, Ev," she urged, her voice low and intense. "Why contain when you can weaponize?" I wanted to dismiss it as conspiracy theory nonsense, but deep down a part of me knew it made a sick kind of sense. The way Unit 47 had been so quick to move to termination protocols, the advanced equipment we'd been given, it all pointed to a larger agenda. Cassandra's group, calling themselves the Truth Seekers, had been gathering evidence for months. They needed someone with insider knowledge of Unit 47 to help them expose the truth. Someone like me. I hesitated. Getting involved meant potentially facing those horrors again, risking not just my life but my sanity. But the faces of Jensen and Davis flashed through my mind. If there was even a chance their deaths were part of something bigger, something more sinister, didn't I owe it to them to find out? "I'm in," I said, downing the last of my beer. "What's the plan?" Over the next few weeks, Cassandra and I dove deep into the world of covert cryptozoology operations. We pored over classified documents she'd obtained, piecing together a picture that was more terrifying than anything I'd encountered in Wyoming. It wasn't just dogmen. There were reports of creatures that defied explanation, beings that could phase through solid matter, aquatic monstrosities that made the Loch Ness Monster look like a goldfish, even entities that seemed to exist partially in other dimensions. But the most chilling discovery was Project Chimera. Hidden beneath layers of security clearances and code names was a program designed to splice human DNA with that of the creatures Unit 47 had captured. The goal? To create the perfect soldier, one that could harness the strengths of these anomalous beings. As we dug deeper, we realized we weren't the only ones on this trail. Dr. Eleanor Blackburn, a geneticist who had worked on Project Chimera before going off the grid, reached out to us through encrypted channels. She had evidence, hard proof of the experiments, but she needed our help to get it out to the world. The plan was risky. We'd need to infiltrate a top-secret facility, extract Dr. Blackburn and her data, and then find a way to disseminate the information before Unit 47 or worse could stop us. It was a suicide mission by any reasonable standard, but we were long past the point of reason. Our team grew. In addition to Cassandra and myself, we recruited Logan Reeves, Cassandra's brother and a skilled hacker, and Zoe Chen, an ex-military operative with a grudge against Unit 47. Dr. Blackburn would guide us remotely, helping us navigate the labyrinth of the facility's security systems. The night of the operation arrived all too soon. As we geared up tactical gear that felt all too familiar, I couldn't shake a sense of déjà vu. Once again I was heading into the unknown, facing creatures beyond comprehension. But this time, I told myself, we were fighting for the truth. Infiltrating the facility was like descending into hell itself. The deeper we went, the more horrors we encountered. Holding cells filled with writhing masses of tentacles and eyes. Laboratories where half-human, half-beast hybrids lay sedated on operating tables. The air itself felt wrong, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. We fought our way through security systems and guards, both human and otherwise. Logan's hacking skills got us through most of the electronic defenses, while Zoe's combat expertise kept us alive when things got physical. Cassandra and I focused on gathering evidence, documenting everything we saw with body cams and portable drives. But it was in the heart of the facility that we faced our greatest challenge. As we downloaded the final pieces of Dr. Blackburn's research, alarms blared. Security doors slammed shut, and a voice I recognized all too well came over the intercom. "I'm disappointed, Mr. Knox," said Victoria Hawthorne, the recruiter who had first brought me into Unit 47. "I had such high hopes for you." What followed was a nightmare of bullets, claws, and things I still struggle to describe. We were pursued not just by human guards, but by the very abominations Unit 47 had created. Creatures that moved faster than the eye could track, that shrugged off gunfire like it was nothing. In the chaos, we got separated. I found myself face to face with something that might once have been human, its skin a patchwork of scales and fur, its eyes glowing with an unnatural intelligence. As it lunged for me, time seemed to slow. In that moment, I saw everything. The path that had led me here, the lives lost, the truths uncovered. I saw a world balanced on the edge of a knife, teetering between mundane ignorance and cosmic horror. And I knew that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same. The creature's claws were inches from my face when a shot rang out. It fell, revealing Cassandra behind it, her gun still smoking. "Come on," she shouted. "We need to move." Somehow, against all odds, we made it out. Bloodied, traumatized, but alive, and more importantly, with the evidence we needed. As we sped away from the facility, explosions rocking the night behind us, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. We had done it. The aftermath was a whirlwind. We released the information through every channel we could: mainstream media, underground networks, online forums. At first, there was disbelief, then outrage, then a tidal wave of demand for answers. Unit 47 and its parent organizations tried to discredit us, of course. They called us conspiracy theorists, attention seekers, even traitors. But the evidence was irrefutable. Governments around the world launched investigations. Whistleblowers came forward, corroborating our claims and adding new, horrifying details. As for me, I found a strange sort of peace. The nightmares didn't stop entirely, but they lost their power over me. I had faced the darkness head-on and come out the other side. More importantly, I had helped bring the truth to light. Cassandra and I stayed together, continuing our work with the truth seekers. There were still mysteries to uncover, creatures to understand. But now we did it in the open, with the support of a public that finally knew the truth about the world they lived in. Looking back on that night in Wyoming, I realize it wasn't the end of my story, but the beginning. It was the start of a journey that would take me to the edges of reality and back, that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the world and my place in it. My name is Evander Knox, and this is my story. A story of monsters and men, of truth and lies, of the thin line that separates our everyday world from the realms of nightmare. It's a story that's far from over, because out there, in the shadows and the wild places, there are still things waiting to be discovered. And as long as there are mysteries to be solved and truths to be uncovered, I'll be there, ready to face whatever comes next. The sun was setting as I pulled my RV onto the narrow dirt road leading to Lake Laconic. I'd been driving for hours, my eyes strained from focusing on the winding mountain highways. My golden retriever, Cooper, sat in the passenger seat, his head lolling to the side as he dozed. The gentle rumble of the engine and the crunch of gravel under the tires were the only sounds breaking the evening stillness. I'd been looking forward to this camping trip for weeks. As a freelance writer constantly juggling deadlines and battling writer's block, I desperately needed a break from the constant pressure. The plan was simple: a few days of peace and quiet by the lake, just me, Cooper, and the great outdoors. No Wi-Fi, no phone calls, no emails, just the opportunity to clear my head and maybe find some inspiration. The road narrowed as we approached the lake, thick pine trees pressing in on both sides. I slowed the RV to a crawl, carefully navigating around potholes and protruding roots. The last thing I needed was to damage the vehicle out here in the middle of nowhere. Finally, the trees parted, revealing the shimmering expanse of Lake Laconic. The water was like glass, perfectly reflecting the fiery orange and pink hues of the sunset. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders as I took in the view. This was exactly what I needed. I maneuvered the RV into a small clearing about 50 yards from the shoreline. It was the perfect spot, close enough to the water for easy access, but far enough back to give us some privacy. As I set about leveling the RV and extending the awning, Cooper bounded out of the vehicle, his tail wagging furiously as he explored our new surroundings. "Don't go too far, buddy," I called out, chuckling at his enthusiasm. It was good to see him so energetic after being cooped up in the RV all day. As I finished setting up our campsite, I noticed something odd. About 100 yards away, partially hidden by a cluster of trees, sat an old pickup truck. It looked like it had seen better days. The once red paint was now a patchwork of rust and faded color, and the tires seemed to be slowly sinking into the soft earth. I frowned, scanning the area for any sign of the truck's owner. The campsite appeared to be deserted except for us. Perhaps it belonged to a local who used the lake as a private fishing spot. Still, something about it made me uneasy. I made a mental note to keep an eye on it. With the RV set up, I decided to take advantage of the remaining daylight. I grabbed a folding chair and my current read, a dog-eared copy of Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, and headed down to the water's edge. Cooper followed, flopping down beside me with a contented sigh as I settled into the chair. The lake was breathtaking in the fading light. The water lapped gently at the shore, creating a soothing rhythm. Across the lake, the dense forest climbed up the sides of the mountains, the trees silhouetted against the darkening sky. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp, pine-scented air. Already I could feel the tension of the past few weeks starting to melt away. As darkness fell, I reluctantly closed my book and headed back to the RV. Cooper trotted alongside me, occasionally darting off to investigate an interesting smell or sound. I fired up the small propane stove in the RV and heated up a can of soup for dinner. It wasn't gourmet, but out here, with the stars starting to twinkle through the trees, it tasted better than any five-star restaurant meal. After dinner, I decided to build a small campfire. There was something primal and comforting about sitting by a fire in the wilderness. I gathered some fallen branches and pine cones, arranging them in a small pit I dug near the RV. Soon a cheery blaze was crackling away, casting dancing shadows across the clearing. I settled into my chair by the fire, Cooper curled up at my feet. The night was quiet, almost unnaturally so. No crickets chirping, no frogs croaking, just the occasional pop and crackle from the fire. It should have been peaceful, but something about the silence made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I tried to shake off the feeling, chalking it up to being alone in an unfamiliar place. I was a city boy at heart, after all. The deep quiet of the forest was probably just throwing me off. Still, I couldn't quite relax. My eyes kept darting to the shadows at the edge of the firelight, half expecting to see something watching us. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, running a hand through my hair. "There's nothing out there." Cooper's head suddenly shot up. His ears perked and alert. He let out a low growl, staring intently into the darkness beyond our campsite. My heart rate spiked. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, straining my eyes to see what had caught his attention. But there was nothing, just the impenetrable wall of blackness beyond the reach of the firelight. Cooper continued to growl softly, his body tense. I reached for the flashlight I'd brought out with me, flicking it on and sweeping the beam across the tree line. The light caught nothing but tree trunks and underbrush. No glowing eyes, no movement. Still, Cooper remained on edge. "Come on, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let's head inside, it's getting late anyway." I doused the fire with water from a nearby bucket, plunging our little clearing into darkness. The walk back to the RV felt longer than it should have, my imagination conjuring shapes and movements in every shadow. I locked the door behind us as soon as we were inside, feeling slightly foolish but unable to shake the sense of unease that had settled over me. I went through my nightly routine on autopilot, brushing my teeth, changing into pajamas, setting out water for Cooper. All the while, my mind kept replaying the evening's events, trying to rationalize my feelings of discomfort. It was just the unfamiliarity of the place, I told myself. By morning, in the bright light of day, everything would seem less sinister. As I settled into bed, Cooper jumped up to lay beside me, something he rarely did at home. I was grateful for his warm, solid presence. Despite my lingering unease, exhaustion from the long drive soon took over, and I drifted off into a fitful sleep. I'm not sure how long I slept before the sound jerked me awake. My eyes flew open, heart pounding as I tried to identify what had disturbed me. The RV was pitch black, the silence absolute. Then I heard it again, a soft, scratching sound, like something dragging across the metal exterior of the vehicle. I lay perfectly still, straining my ears. It could be a branch, I thought desperately, just a tree limb scraping against the side in the wind. But even as the thought formed, I knew it wasn't true. There was no wind. The night was as still as death. The scratching moved, traveling along the side of the RV towards the back. It was methodical, almost purposeful. This was no tree branch. Something was out there, circling us. Cooper was awake now too, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He stood at attention at the foot of the bed, his eyes fixed on the rear window of the RV. I reached for him, burying my fingers in his fur, as much to reassure myself as to calm him. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet RV. "It's probably just an animal, a raccoon or something." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The scratching was too high up to be a raccoon. Whatever was out there was big. Suddenly the scratching stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse, filled with a palpable tension. I held my breath, waiting. Cooper's growl deepened, the fur along his spine standing on end. Then, without warning, something slammed against the side of the RV. The whole vehicle rocked with the impact. I bit back a scream, my hand flying to my mouth. Cooper barked, the sound explosive in the confined space. "Shh," I hissed, trying to quiet him even as my own heart threatened to beat out of my chest. "It's okay. It's okay." Another impact, this time at the back of the RV. Then another. It was like something was testing the vehicle, looking for a weak spot. I scrambled out of bed, nearly falling in my haste. My hands shook as I fumbled for the flashlight I'd left on the small dining table. The beam of light seemed pitifully small as I shone it out the windows, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was out there. But all I could see was darkness. The attacks on the RV had stopped, but I could feel a presence out there, watching, waiting. I needed to do something. Call for help, drive away, anything. But as I reached for my phone, my heart sank. No signal. Of course not. We were miles from the nearest cell tower. The keys to the RV were hanging by the door. I could try to drive away, but what if the engine didn't start? What if whatever was out there attacked while we were vulnerable? Me fumbling with the keys, the engine struggling to turn over. A new sound broke the silence, a low guttural growl that was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't a bear or a wolf or any animal I could identify. It was deep, primal, and it spoke to something ancient and fearful in my hindbrain. Every instinct I had screamed danger. Cooper whined, pressing himself against my legs. I reached down to comfort him, my eyes never leaving the windows. "It's okay, buddy," I murmured, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. "We're going to be okay." The growl came again, closer this time. It sounded like it was right outside the door. I backed away, pulling Cooper with me, until my back hit the far wall of the RV. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, any plan. The RV's small bathroom was to my right. It was barely big enough for one person, but it had a solid door. Maybe if we barricaded ourselves in there. Before I could move, something scraped against the RV's door. Not scratching this time, but a deliberate, almost human-like movement, as if something was trying to work the handle. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense. Please, I thought desperately, please be locked. I always locked the door, it was habit, but in that moment I couldn't remember if I'd done it tonight. The handle jiggled. Once, twice, then stillness. For a long moment nothing happened. The silence stretched on, broken only by my ragged breathing and Cooper's soft whines. Had it given up? Gone away? Then, without warning, something slammed into the door. The whole RV shook with the impact. Again and again, each blow more powerful than the last. The door groaned under the assault, the frame creaking ominously. This was it. Whatever was out there was coming in, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. In desperation, I lunged for the small kitchenette, yanking open drawers until I found what I was looking for, a large chef's knife. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The assault on the door continued, each impact sending shock waves through the RV. I could hear the metal bending, the lock straining. It was only a matter of time before it gave way. I backed into the corner furthest from the door, knife clutched in my shaking hand. Cooper pressed against my legs, his growls a continuous rumble. Together we waited for the inevitable. The door burst open with a deafening crash, cool night air rushing in. I raised the knife, ready to face whatever horror was about to enter. But nothing came through the doorway. The night beyond was pitch black, impenetrable. For a long, terrible moment, nothing moved. Then slowly, a shape began to emerge from the darkness. It was huge, far larger than any animal I'd ever seen. As it stepped into the dim light of the RV, I felt my breath catch in my throat. The creature before me defied description. It stood easily 7 feet tall, its body a mass of matted fur and corded muscle. But it was the face that froze my blood. It was almost human, but twisted, feral. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural intelligence as they fixed on me. I knew in that moment that I was looking at something that shouldn't exist, something that had no place in the rational, orderly world I thought I knew. This was a creature of myth, of nightmare. It took a step forward, its massive claws leaving gouges in the RV's floor. I pressed myself further into the corner, the knife suddenly feeling very small and inadequate in my hand. Cooper's growls had turned to whimpers, the brave dog cowering behind my legs. The creature's mouth opened, revealing rows of yellowed, razor-sharp teeth. That same guttural growl from before emerged, but this time I could have sworn there were words hidden in the animalistic sound. It was trying to speak. What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. The creature cocked its head, regarding me with those terrifyingly intelligent eyes. Then slowly, deliberately, it raised one massive clawed hand and pointed directly at me. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity that this wasn't just a random attack. This thing, whatever it was, had come for me specifically. But why? What could it possibly want with me? As if in response to my unspoken question, the creature took another step forward. Its claws flexed, and I knew with certainty that it was preparing to attack. In that split second, survival instinct took over. Without conscious thought, I hurled the knife at the creature's face and dove to the side. The creature roared in pain and fury as the knife found its mark, burying itself in its shoulder. I scrambled towards the open door, yelling at Cooper to follow. We burst out of the RV into the cool night air, the creature's enraged howls echoing behind us. I ran blindly into the darkness, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Cooper kept pace beside me, his breath coming in harsh pants. I had no idea where we were going, only that we needed to get as far away from that thing as possible. Behind us, I could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush. It was following us, and it was gaining ground fast. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror kept me moving. I knew that if that thing caught us, it would be the end. Suddenly, the trees thinned, and we burst out onto a dirt road. In the faint moonlight, I could make out the shape of a vehicle a short distance away. It was the old pickup truck I'd noticed earlier. Without stopping to think, I sprinted towards it, praying that by some miracle, the keys would be inside. As we neared the truck, I could see that the driver's side window was down. I reached in, my hand frantically searching for keys. Nothing. The creature's roars were getting closer. I could hear trees snapping as it plowed through the forest after us. In desperation, I yanked open the truck's door and climbed inside, pulling Cooper in after me. It wasn't much protection, but it was better than being out in the open. As I slammed the door shut, my hand brushed against something cool and metallic under the seat. My heart leapt. Could it be? I reached down and felt the unmistakable shape of a key ring. With shaking hands, I shoved the key into the ignition and turned. The engine coughed and sputtered, but didn't catch. Come on, I muttered, turning the key again. The creature burst out of the tree line, its glowing eyes fixed on the truck. It let out a bone-chilling roar and charged towards us. On the third try, the engine roared to life. I slammed the truck into gear and floored the accelerator. The tires spun in the loose dirt before finding purchase, and we shot forward just as the creature reached for the back of the truck. I didn't slow down, didn't look back. I drove like a madman down the dark, winding road, the old truck protesting as I pushed it to its limits. Cooper huddled in the passenger seat, whining softly. It wasn't until we hit the main highway that I allowed myself to breathe. I drove for hours, putting as much distance between us and Lake Laconic as possible. When the sun finally began to rise, I pulled into a small town and parked in front of a diner. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. I sat in the truck, trembling, unable to make sense of the night's events. What was that creature? Why had it come after me? As the sun climbed higher in the sky, I finally mustered the courage to leave the truck. My legs felt weak and shaky as I stumbled into the diner, Cooper close at my heels. The few early morning patrons turned to stare at us. No doubt we were quite a sight, disheveled and wild-eyed. I collapsed into a booth, ordering coffee when the waitress came over. She eyed me warily but didn't comment on my appearance. As the caffeine slowly brought me back to some semblance of normalcy, I tried to process what had happened. The creature that had attacked us defied explanation. It wasn't a bear or a wolf or any known animal. Its intelligence, its purposefulness, the way it had seemed to target me specifically, none of it made sense. And yet I knew what I had seen. The memory of those glowing eyes, the twisted, almost human face, was seared into my mind. I considered going to the police, but quickly dismissed the idea. Who would believe me? I had no proof, no evidence. They'd think I was crazy or on drugs. No, this was something I'd have to deal with on my own. But how? I couldn't go back to the campsite. The thought alone made me break out in a cold sweat. But I couldn't just leave my RV there either. It contained most of my belongings. Not to mention it was my home and my biggest financial asset. And what about the truck I'd borrowed? I'd have to return it somehow. As I sat there mulling over my options, a conversation from the next booth over caught my attention. Two men, older guys with the weathered look of locals, were talking in low voices. "Another sighting up by Laconic," one was saying. "Thorpe's boy swears he saw it crossing the road near Milligan's Creek." "Damn fool kid," the other grunted. "Ought to know better than to be up there after dark, especially this time of year." I leaned in, straining to hear more. Were they talking about the creature? "You think it's true?" the first man asked. "All them stories about the Grinshaw?" My breath caught in my throat. The Grinshaw? Was that what they called it? "Don't matter what I think," the second man replied gruffly. "Fact is, people been seeing something up in them woods for nigh on 50 years. Whether it's some kind of animal or something else, well, I reckon that's between a man and his maker." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This thing, this Grinshaw, had been around for decades. How was that possible? And more importantly, why hadn't I ever heard of it before? As the men's conversation turned to other topics, I pulled out my phone. There was signal here in town, and I quickly opened a browser and searched for Grinshaw plus Lake Laconic. To my surprise, there were quite a few results. Most were dismissive. Local news articles debunking Bigfoot sightings, folklorists discussing the evolution of regional myths. But there were other accounts too, buried deeper in the search results. Campers who'd fled the area in terror. Hikers who'd gone missing, only to turn up days later with no memory of where they'd been. And through it all, descriptions of a creature that matched what I'd seen. Huge, feral, with an almost human face and glowing eyes. My mind reeled as I read account after account. How could something like this exist without the whole world knowing about it? But then I realized, who would believe it? Even now, having seen it with my own eyes, part of me wanted to dismiss it as a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. But I knew it was real. And somehow, for some reason, it had come after me specifically. As I sat there, lost in thought, the bell over the diner's door jingled. I looked up reflexively, then felt my blood run cold. A man had entered, tall, broad-shouldered, with a wild beard and piercing eyes. But it wasn't his appearance that shocked me. It was the fact that I recognized him. It was the man from the campsite, the one I'd glimpsed in the old pickup truck before all hell broke loose. Our eyes met, and I saw recognition flare in his gaze. For a long moment we stared at each other, the bustle of the diner fading away. Then slowly, deliberately, he made his way to my booth. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. I nodded mutely, my heart pounding. He slid into the seat across from me, his eyes never leaving my face. "Reckon you and I need to have a talk," he said, "about what happened up at the lake." I swallowed hard, a mixture of fear and anticipation coursing through me. This man knew something. Maybe he could provide the answers I so desperately needed. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "And what was that thing?" The man sighed heavily, running a hand through his tangled beard. Name's Frank, he said. And that thing, as you call it, well, that's a long story. One you might not believe even after what you saw. Try me, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Frank nodded, a grim smile tugging at his lips. All right then, but first we're going to need more coffee and privacy. You got a place we can talk? I thought of the stolen truck in the parking lot, my only refuge at the moment. Yeah, I said, I've got a place. As we left the diner, me clutching a to-go cup of coffee and Frank following close behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the precipice of something huge. Whatever Frank was about to tell me, I knew it would change everything. The world as I knew it had already been turned upside down. Now, I was about to find out why. We climbed into the old pickup truck, Cooper wedging himself between us on the bench seat. As I started the engine, Frank gave me a knowing look. "Borrowed this, did you?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. I felt my face flush. It was an emergency. I'm going to return it, I swear." Frank waved off my explanation. "Don't worry about it, it's mine anyway. Glad it came in handy." I blinked in surprise, but before I could respond, Frank continued. "Now where can we go that's private? We've got a lot to discuss, and it ain't the kind of talk meant for public ears." I thought for a moment. "There's a state park about 20 miles south of here," I said. "Should be quiet this time of year." Frank nodded his approval, and I pulled out of the diner parking lot, heading south. As we drove, I couldn't help but sneak glances at my mysterious companion. Who was he? How did he know about the creature? And why did I have the feeling he'd been expecting me? We rode in silence for a while, the only sound the rumble of the truck's engine and Cooper's occasional whine. Finally, unable to contain my curiosity any longer, I spoke up. "So, the Grinshaw," I said, testing the name. "I overheard some locals talking about it. Is that what you call that thing?" Frank grunted. "Grinshaw's just a local name. Been around for generations. But the thing itself? It's older. Much older." A chill ran down my spine at his words. "What do you mean, older?" Frank turned to look at me, his eyes unreadable. "What do you know about the history of this area?" he asked. I shrugged. "Not much," I admitted. "I'm not from around here, just came up for some camping to clear my head." Frank mumbled. "Well, long before the loggers and the tourists came, this was Klamath Land. They had stories passed down for generations about a creature that lived in the deepest parts of the forest. A guardian spirit, they called it. Protector of the land." I frowned. "Protector? That thing didn't seem very protective when it was trying to rip my RV apart." Frank's expression darkened. "It's not what it once was," he said quietly. "Something changed it, corrupted it. Now it's more demon than guardian, and it's hungry, always hungry." We lapsed into silence again as I processed this information. It sounded crazy, like something out of a horror movie. And yet, after what I'd seen, could I really dismiss it? We arrived at the state park a short while later. As I'd hoped, it was deserted. I parked the truck in a secluded spot, surrounded by towering pines. The quiet here was different from the eerie silence at Lake Laconic, peaceful rather than oppressive. Frank climbed out of the truck, stretching his back with a series of pops and cracks. "Come on," he said. "Let's walk. Easier to talk that way." I followed him, Cooper trotting along beside us. We walked in silence for a while, the soft pine needles muffling our footsteps. Finally, Frank began to speak. "The Grinshaw, or whatever you want to call it, has been in these parts for centuries," he said. "Used to be, it kept to itself, scared off the occasional hunter or logger, but never attacked unless provoked. But something changed about 50 years ago." "What happened?" I asked, hanging on his every word. Frank's face grew grim. "Progress." He spat the word like a curse. "Loggers started moving deeper into the old growth forest. Developers began eyeing the lake for vacation homes. And the Grinshaw, it got angry." He paused, lost in thought for a moment before continuing. At first it was just property damage. Equipment destroyed, construction sites wrecked. But then people started going missing. Hunters, campers, surveyors. Some turned up weeks later, minds broken, babbling about a monster in the woods. Others were never found at all. I shuddered, remembering the terror of the previous night. But why? I asked. Why is it doing this? Frank stopped walking and turned to face me. It's trying to drive us out, he said, to reclaim its territory. But there's more to it than that. The Grimshaw, it feeds on fear. The terror it causes, the chaos, it sustains it, makes it stronger. I felt sick. So all those stories, all those sightings over the years. Feeding time, Frank nodded grimly. We walked in silence for a while, the weight of Frank's words settling over us. Finally, I voiced the question that had been nagging at me since the diner. Why me? I asked. Why did it come after me specifically? Frank's expression softened slightly. That's the real question, isn't it? He said. And the answer? Well, that's where things get complicated. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his beard. The Grimshaw, for all its power, is bound by certain rules. Ancient magic, I guess you'd call it. It can't just attack anyone it wants. It needs an invitation of sorts. I frowned. I didn't invite it, I protested. I didn't even know it existed until last night. Not that kind of invitation, Frank shook his head. It's more a state of mind. Loneliness, isolation, fear. These things call to the Grimshaw like a beacon. And you, my friend, were broadcasting loud and clear. I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again. He wasn't wrong. I'd come to Lake Laconic to escape, to isolate myself. And beneath my desire for peace and quiet, there had been an undercurrent of fear. Fear of failure, fear of the future, fear of facing the blank page. So what now? I asked, my voice small. Is it going to keep coming after me? Frank's expression was grave. Now that it's got your scent, yeah, it'll keep coming. Distance won't matter. Time won't matter. The Grimshaw is patient, and it never forgets a target. I felt my knees go weak. Cooper whined, pressing against my leg as if sensing my distress. So what do I do? I whispered. How do I stop it? Frank was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of his words. There's only one way to stop the Grimshaw, he said. You have to kill it. I stared at him in disbelief. Kill it? How? That thing it's not natural. How can you kill something like that? Frank's eyes met mine, and I saw a determination there that both reassured and terrified me. With difficulty, he said, and at great risk, but it can be done. I know, because I've been trying to do it for the past 30 years. I gaped at him. 30 years? But why? Why you? A shadow passed over Frank's face. Because 30 years ago, the Grimshaw took someone from me, someone I loved, and I swore I'd end it no matter how long it took. The pieces started to fall into place. That's why you were at the lake, I said. You were hunting it. Frank nodded. I've been tracking it for decades, learning its patterns, studying its weaknesses, and I think I finally know how to kill it, but I can't do it alone. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized what he was saying. You need my help, I said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Frank said simply. The Grimshaw is drawn to you now. It'll come for you again. We can use that. Set a trap. I ran a hand through my hair, my mind reeling. This was insane. 24 hours ago, my biggest worry had been writer's block. Now I was being asked to help hunt a mythical monster. What if I say no? I asked, already knowing the answer. Frank's expression was sympathetic but firm. Then you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, never knowing when or where it might appear, and sooner or later it'll catch you. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. When I opened them again, I saw Frank watching me intently, waiting for my decision. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm in. Tell me what we need to do." Frank nodded, a grim smile on his face. "First things first," he said. "We need to get you prepared. There's equipment back at my cabin. Weapons, protective gear, things that might give us an edge." "And then?" I asked. "Then," Frank said, his eyes gleaming with a fierce determination, "we go hunting." As we walked back to the truck, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. I was about to embark on the most dangerous journey of my life, facing a creature out of nightmare. But for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. The blank page that had tormented me seemed trivial now, in the face of this primal threat. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. This was a story that needed to be told. And I was going to make damn sure I lived to tell it. Frank's cabin was a small, rustic structure nestled deep in the woods, far from any main roads. As we pulled up, I couldn't help but notice the various protective symbols carved into the wooden beams. Some I recognized from my limited knowledge of folklore, others completely alien to me. Inside, the cabin was a curious mix of modern technology and ancient artifacts. Maps covered one wall, dotted with pins and scrawled notes. A bank of computer monitors flickered with data I couldn't begin to understand. And everywhere, books, old leather-bound tomes stacked alongside modern scientific journals. "Welcome to Grinshaw Central," Frank said, a hint of pride in his voice. 30 years of research all in one place. Over the next few days, Frank began my crash course in monster hunting. We pored over his research, studied grainy photos and shaky video footage of the Grinshaw. Frank taught me about its strengths, its incredible speed and strength, its ability to track prey over vast distances, but he also spoke of its weaknesses. "The Grinshaw fears fire," he explained one evening as we sat by the cabin's fireplace. "It's not just a physical thing. Fire represents humanity's mastery over nature. It's anathema to what the Grinshaw is." We prepared weapons, shotguns loaded with special incendiary rounds, homemade flamethrowers, even makeshift grenades filled with a mixture Frank swore would burn even in water. All the while, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were woefully unprepared for what we were about to face. Finally, after a week of preparation, Frank deemed us ready. "It's time," he said, his voice grim. "We need to draw it out, force a confrontation on our terms." The plan was simple, in theory. We would return to Lake Laconic, to the spot where I'd first encountered the Grinshaw. There, we would set up camp, making ourselves as vulnerable and tempting a target as possible. As we drove back to the lake, the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees, once beautiful and majestic, now felt oppressive, hiding untold dangers in their shadows. Cooper whined softly from the back seat, picking up on our tension. We arrived at the lakeside as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. My abandoned RV still stood where I'd left it, looking small and fragile in the growing darkness. "Perfect," Frank muttered, surveying the area. "We'll set up here, make it look like we're just two foolish campers unaware of the danger." We worked quickly, setting up a tent and building a fire. All around the perimeter of our camp we laid our traps, tripwires connected to flares, hidden pits filled with sharpened stakes, and containers of Frank's special accelerant placed strategically. As night fell, we sat by the fire, guns close at hand, and waited. The hours crept by, each sound from the forest making us jump. But the Grinshaw didn't appear. It was nearing dawn when we heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Cooper began to bark frantically, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "It's here," Frank whispered, raising his shotgun. The attack, when it came, was swift and brutal. The Grinshaw burst from the tree line, a mass of fur and claws and glowing eyes. It was even larger than I remembered, its presence filling the clearing with an almost palpable malevolence. Our traps worked to a degree. Flares ignited, filling the air with blinding light and acrid smoke. The Grimshaw roared in pain and fury as it stumbled into one of the hidden pits, but it recovered quickly, too quickly. Frank and I opened fire, the incendiary rounds leaving trails of fire in the air. Where they struck the Grimshaw, its fur ignited, filling the air with the stench of burning hair and flesh. But still it came on, seemingly unstoppable in its rage. With a swipe of its massive paw, it sent Frank flying. He hit a tree with a sickening thud and crumpled to the ground, unmoving. Now it was just me, face to face with the nightmare that had haunted me for weeks. Time seemed to slow. I could see every detail of the Grimshaw's face, the intelligence and hatred in its glowing eyes. In that moment, I understood what Frank had meant about the creature's corruption. This was a force of nature twisted into something unnatural, a guardian turned destroyer. As the Grimshaw lunged for me, I had a sudden flash of inspiration. I dove to the side, rolling towards the fire. My hand closed around a burning log and I ignored the searing pain as I thrust it towards the creature's face. The effect was instantaneous. The Grimshaw recoiled with a shriek of pain and fury. In that moment of distraction, I grabbed the container of Frank's accelerant and hurled it at the monster. The container burst open, dousing the Grimshaw in the volatile liquid. With the last of my strength, I flung the burning log. The Grimshaw went up like a torch, its howls of agony echoing across the lake. It thrashed and rolled, trying to extinguish the flames, but the fire burned too hot, too fierce. I watched, exhausted and in pain, as the creature that had terrorized this forest for decades slowly burned away to ash. As the last embers died out, I felt a profound sense of relief, tinged with an unexpected sadness. Something ancient had passed from the world, for better or worse. I found Frank unconscious but alive. Over the next few weeks, as we recovered from our injuries, we spoke often about what had happened, about the Grimshaw, about the forces that shape our world just out of sight. "So what now?" I asked him one evening as we sat on the porch of his cabin watching the sun set. Frank was quiet for a long moment. "Now," he finally said, "now we keep watch. The Grimshaw may be gone, but there are other things out there in the dark. Someone needs to stand guard." I nodded, understanding the weight of his words. My old life, my old worries, seemed distant now, almost trivial. I had seen behind the veil, glimpsed the hidden truths of the world. There was no going back. As I sat there watching the shadows lengthen, I began to formulate the story in my mind, not just of the Grimshaw, but of all the hidden things, the truths that lurk just beyond our perception. It would be my life's work, I realized, to seek out these stories, to shine a light into the darkness. The blank page no longer terrified me. Now it was an opportunity, a chance to reveal the hidden wonders and terrors of the world. As night fell, I picked up my pen and began to write. The year was 1978, and I was a cocky college kid, convinced I knew everything there was to know about the outdoors. So when my buddy Wyatt and I decided to try an unmarked trail through Olympic National Park, I figured it was just another chance to prove my superior woodsman skills. We were doing great. The scenery was killer, and neither of us had twisted an ankle yet. That's when the smell hit me. It was like nothing I'd ever smelled before. Rotting meat mixed with something chemical. My stomach lurched and I gagged a bit, but Wyatt didn't seem to react. "Dude, you smell that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Smell what?" "Man, you're always on about some weird smell." He snorted, that typical Wyatt smirk on his face. I chalked it up to nerves, figured maybe some dead animal was up ahead. Still, my gut was churning uneasily. That smell hung heavy on the air, and something was telling me this wasn't roadkill. A few minutes later, we came to a clearing, and that's when I saw it. There was a carcass lying in the middle of the trail. Big thing, fur the color of rust, Half of it gone. Whatever had eaten it left a ragged mass of exposed bone and muscle. But worse than the gore was the way the carcass was positioned. Limbs splayed out in an unnatural way, almost like the thing had been arranged. We both froze, Wyatt's smirk finally fading. "Bear?" he whispered. His voice sounded small. I shook my head. "No way. Bear wouldn't—" I didn't finish the sentence. Whatever did that was no bear. We crept closer, instinct screaming at us to turn around. Whatever killed that animal could still be close. The smell was even stronger now, almost overpowering. Then I saw them. Footprints. They were huge, each toe the size of my hand and clawed. Whatever made them had walked on two legs. A wave of cold dread washed over me. I wasn't sure what was worse. The idea of an unknown predator that could rip a deer apart so easily, or the strange sense of intelligence those footprints conveyed. I heard a rustle behind us, then a grunt that was low and guttural. We both whirled around. There it was, standing in the shadows at the edge of the clearing. I don't know how to fully describe it. Like a nightmare given form. Taller than a man by far, easily 7 feet. Stooped, with long, powerful arms that nearly reached the ground. Furred and filthy, patchy in places. But its head, it had a wolfish muzzle filled with long yellow teeth. And the eyes, they held a terrifying cunning. We didn't need words. Wyatt and I both took off running in the opposite direction. Branches whipped at my face. The ground tore at my feet, but the crashing behind us told me the creature was faster, gaining fast. Each of those inhuman grunts felt like a punch to the back of my skull. "Split up!" I yelled, gasping for breath. "Maybe it won't follow both." Wyatt didn't even hesitate, veering off to the left. A flash of guilt for leaving him behind flickered, then was swallowed by desperate terror. I kept running, hurdling fallen logs and dodging low-hanging branches. The pounding of my own heart almost drowned out the sounds of pursuit. Still I pushed, lungs burning, legs screaming at me to stop. A fallen tree lay across the trail ahead. No time to go around. I gathered what little strength I had left, launched myself up and over, and landed hard on the other side. Just as I regained my footing, a thunderous crash sounded behind me. I stumbled a few steps, then twisted around. It had followed, had ignored Wyatt completely. Why me? The thought was raw panic in my head. There was nowhere else to run. The trail disappeared into dense undergrowth to either side. In front of me the creature stood, its muzzle dripping saliva. The sickly sweet stench of rot washed over me in a wave. This was it. This was where I'd die. It raised one massive paw, claws extending. I scrambled back, eyes darting frantically for anything I could use as a weapon. A gunshot echoed through the clearing. The creature jerked, a snarl ripping from its throat. I looked over, saw movement through the trees. Another gunshot cracked out, and this time the creature flinched back, another grunt tearing from its throat. A shadowy figure, gun leveled, stepped into view. "Get behind me!" The voice was hoarse, a woman's. I staggered to my feet, my heart hammering against my ribs. Didn't need to be told twice. The creature was watching the newcomer, uncertainty in its inhuman eyes. The woman raised the gun again, firing once more. The creature let out a roar of pain. With a final menacing glare, it turned and crashed away through the undergrowth. I stood there, trembling in weak-kneed relief, as the woman lowered the gun and approached. She was older, hair streaked with gray, face lined, but her gaze was sharper than any blade. "Name's Beatrice," she said gruffly, then gestured in the direction the creature fled. "You have a friend waiting for you. Best go find him before that thing circles back." My legs were stiff, my body aching, but I took off through the trees in the direction Wyatt had disappeared. Beatrice was right. If that thing circled back, he might not be so lucky. Finding him was surprisingly easy. He was crouched at the base of a tree about 100 yards away, his face pale. Relief flooded me as I stumbled toward him. "Wyatt! Man, are you hurt?" He turned at the sound of my voice, and I saw the terror in his eyes. A trickle of blood ran from a cut on his forehead. Did it follow you?" he stammered. Before I could answer, we both heard a low growl from the direction of the trail. My blood ran cold. We weren't safe yet. "Come on, let's move," I said, pulling him to his feet. "We need to find that woman. Get the hell out of here." We plunged deeper into the woods, not bothering to be quiet anymore. Panic was a far more potent motivator than fear of attracting attention. After what felt like an eternity, we stumbled into a clearing. Beatrice was there, crouched by a moss-covered rock, cleaning her rifle. She looked up sharply as we emerged. "We can hold up here for the night," she said, her voice gruff but not unkind. "There's a river nearby for water, and I set a few snares. Maybe we'll get lucky and have something for dinner tonight besides fear." That night, huddled around a small fire Beatrice had built with expert ease, I finally found the courage to ask the question burning in my mind. What was that thing?" Beatrice paused in her fire-stoking and looked up, her gaze traveling over us both. Then, with a resigned sigh, she spoke. "There's a lot you city folk don't know about the woods. These mountains, they hold things older than your fancy books and maps. Things that most people think are stories told to scare kids." Her voice took on a grim note. "Up here, the stories are real." "Stories of what?" Wyatt pressed, his voice trembling slightly. "Skinwalkers," Beatrice said simply. My breath hitched. I'd heard the stories as a kid, whispered rumors around campfires and in hushed tones at sleepovers. Mythical, shape-shifting creatures, half man, half beast, always hungry, always deadly. Wyatt, ever the skeptic, scoffed. "You really believe that crap? Come on, it was probably just a big deformed wolf or something." Beatrice shook her head, a look of weary pity in her eyes. "There ain't no deformed wolf that walks like a man, that butchers prey like that, or stares at you with eyes that smart. You don't believe in skinwalkers until you see one with your own eyes." We didn't speak for a long time after that. We ate the rabbit Beatrice's snare had caught, meager pickings, but it calmed our stomachs. We listened to the sounds of the forest at night, the hooting of owls, the rustle of animals in the underbrush. I kept imagining I saw the gleam of yellow eyes in the darkness, heard that same guttural growl. Sleep was impossible. At first light, Beatrice woke us, her pack already slung over her shoulder. "We're heading back to the trailhead," she said briskly. "It's a good 10-mile hike, but we'll make it by nightfall if we keep a steady pace." "What about that thing?" I couldn't bring myself to say its name again. Beatrice's weathered finger tapped the rifle resting against her pack. "I've got enough rounds here to make it think twice about following, but the real trick is not to give it the chance." We followed her out of the clearing, moving quickly, not speaking. The sun broke through the trees, casting long, dappled shadows, and somehow the forest seemed even less forgiving than before. With each rustle of leaves, with every snapping branch, my heart leaped into my throat. Beatrice set a relentless pace. Occasionally she'd pause, studying the ground or the trees for some unseen sign, then nod and move on. It was almost a relief to finally breach the trees and see the familiar warm path of the trailhead ahead. We picked up speed, our steps falling into an urgent rhythm. I didn't feel safe until we were in Beatrice's ancient pickup truck, rattling down the mountain road toward civilization. That night, in the grimy motel room I shared with Wyatt, the image of that creature was seared into my mind. Its hunched form, its matted fur, and those intelligent, predatory eyes. I tossed and turned, unable to escape the feeling it was watching, waiting. In the morning I knew I couldn't stay. I said goodbye to Wyatt, a brief awkward thing. We both knew there were things between us we'd never speak of. I packed my stuff, thanked Beatrice for saving our lives, and left. I drove for days and didn't stop until I was so far from the Pacific Northwest I could almost convince myself it had all been a nightmare. The aftermath of that experience isn't pretty. I rarely go hiking alone anymore, and I jump at every unexpected sound in the woods. The face of that skinwalker haunts my dreams. Sometimes in the darkest moments I think back to what Beatrice said and wonder, if there's one out there, are there more? Years passed, and I tried to put that horrifying experience behind me. I finished college, got a job in the city, and did my best to forget about the things that lurk in the wilderness. But the memory of that day never truly faded. It was always there, lurking at the edges of my consciousness, ready to resurface in my nightmares. It was on a crisp autumn evening, nearly a decade after the incident, when the past came crashing back into my life. I was walking home from work, taking my usual shortcut through a small urban park. The trees were shedding their leaves, creating a carpet of red and gold beneath my feet. As I rounded a bend in the path, I froze. There, standing beneath a streetlight, was a figure that made my blood run cold. It was Beatrice, looking older but still as sharp-eyed and formidable as ever. She turned, her gaze locking onto mine, and I knew instantly that this was no chance encounter. "Been a long time, city boy," she said, her voice just as gruff as I remembered. I stammered, struggling to find words. "Beatrice, what are you doing here?" She stepped closer, her eyes darting around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "They're spreading," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Moving into new territories. I've been tracking them, trying to warn folks, but I need help." My heart was pounding. I wanted to run, to pretend I hadn't seen her, to go back to my safe, normal life. But deep down, I knew I couldn't. That day in the forest had changed me forever, and here was my chance to make a difference. "What can I do?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Beatrice nodded, a glimmer of approval in her eyes. "First, we need to talk, somewhere private." We ended up in a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town. Over bitter coffee and greasy food, Beatrice laid out a story that was even more terrifying than I could have imagined. The skinwalkers weren't just isolated incidents in remote forests anymore. They were adapting, learning to blend in with human society. There had been sightings in suburbs, reports of strange occurrences in small towns across the country. "But how?" I asked, my mind reeling. "How can they possibly blend in?" Beatrice leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're shapeshifters, remember? They can take on human form. Not perfectly, mind you. There's always something off, but enough to fool most folks who aren't looking too closely." The implications were staggering. How many were out there? How long had this been going on? And most chillingly, how many unsolved disappearances could be attributed to these creatures? As dawn broke, Beatrice and I had formulated a plan. She had a network of hunters and trackers across the country, people who knew the truth and were dedicated to protecting others from it. I would use my city skills, my knowledge of technology and social media, to help coordinate their efforts, to look for patterns in reported sightings and unexplained events. It wasn't an easy decision. I knew that by agreeing to help, I was stepping back into a world of danger and fear. But I also knew that I couldn't turn my back on this, not when innocent lives were at stake. Over the next few months, my life changed dramatically. By day, I maintained my normal job and routines, but my nights and weekends were consumed by research, by poring over reports and connecting with Beatrice's network of hunters. We had some successes. In a small town in Idaho, we managed to track and eliminate a skinwalker that had been terrorizing the local livestock. In Florida, we warned authorities about a suspicious drifter just in time to prevent what could have been a tragedy. But for every victory, there seemed to be a new threat. The skinwalkers were cunning, adaptable. They learned from each encounter, becoming harder to track and identify. And worst of all, their numbers seemed to be growing.